Philip, the first time that I met our guest today
Yeah.
was about 2 weeks into the pandemic when CCAR decided we better catch up and be ready to deliver the Recovery Coach Academy virtually. And I produced that session for you.
Yeah, and good old Adobe Connect, right?
Yeah. Well, we don't need to
Yeah.
be
Well, I was just, because we talked
disparaging
about that before we started.
a
So,
tool that couldn't keep
and our
pace.
guest is Jesse Heffernan. Hello, Jesse.
Hi, Jesse.
Hello, Phil and Sandy, and good morning.
The first time I ever met Jesse, he was at the Recovery Coach Academy,
Mhm.
and you still have that award, right, as the best creative art piece ever, the best
I think it
art
holds.
piece ever. It
Was it
does.
out
I think it
of
Yeah.
does.
pipe cleaners?
No, it was Play-Doh, best Play-Doh art ever.
Oh,
Yeah.
And I realized, I mean, it was a lot of fun, and I love when that memory comes up on Facebook. I'm like, I still have it. It's still mine. Yeah.
I might
Yeah.
have to go in the archives and catch a look at that.
No, but
Yeah.
one thing about I knew from Jesse at the very beginning, and when we were doing Recovery Coach Academies in person, it becomes readily apparent was what an amazing learner you are, and now that has transferred into being a gifted facilitator and teacher, and so I'm just been inspired by your willingness to learn and your your contributions to the class, and still to this day. So, but that was a few years ago, wasn't it, when you first took the Recovery Coach Academy?
June of 2014.
Wow.
They
A
tell me it
few
was the
years
best
ago.
class ever.
Eight
Yeah.
years
It's
ago.
yeah, it may be the best class ever.
Best
Yeah,
class ever, they said. Yeah.
Yeah.
that's what
Mhm.
Phil
Cool.
says to
To
every
every
class.
class, yes. So, where would you like to start, Jesse? Would you like to tell us? I'll give you a question. See if you would like
Okay.
to start here. What is your earliest childhood memory? And Sandy's caveat to that is she likes to hear about what it was like for you growing up, about family members and
Hmm.
siblings and
What
friends
your
and all of that.
situation was.
That's really interesting
Hmm.
because it's a mixed bag, right? And I,
Hmm.
and I think a lot of folks got mixed bags of happy, medium,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
and not so good kind of things going on. So my home environment, was an apartment complex, low income housing, with just my mom, and then I had an older brother who moved out when I was really young, and then eventually I had a younger brother. I met my dad a handful of times, and coincidentally he became a part of my recovery journey, like when I got in, which is kind of its own epic tale, if you will, about how that just happened. Um, so I'm living here. I think it was really great because I've come to find when I look back at it, like some of my memories are like, even though there was a lot of like kids there my age that were like maybe not in the best circumstances, like we really connected, like our stuff kind of resonated with each other, right? And even though we didn't have the words or the comprehension of what was going on, like I think we still kind of got each other through it. We still, like, I can still remember those things, and remember how, like, we just kind of struggled and survived together in some circumstances, throughout that time period. And then, eventually finding, the outlet of drugs and alcohol and smoking and all that stuff. But, you know, I can think of, there were some times where things for me felt like normal. So I did a lot of like internal comparison to people's outsides, and a lot of like, I was, the TV was the babysitter. So it's like, does my life look like Full House? No, it doesn't, but I'd like for it to, right?
Hmm.
Um, I did, like, those things became kind of the measurements of what I thought life was supposed to look like, right? And there were moments where I felt, I guess, like it was safe enough and okay enough to really both give and experience affection, like, but there was very little actual, like, transferring of those emotions and feelings and stuff like that, in family dynamics and stuff like that, right? I mean, I remember one of the first times and maybe only times like I cried like at my grandpa's funeral with my mom there, and like, and I actually got to experience that, right? But for a lot of it, it was just, figuring out how to, what I call, be a trauma chameleon. They made a song about it, trauma chameleon.
Oh
That was
my.
the
Oh,
that was
Phil's gonna use this now,
That's a
Jesse.
good
Thanks
joke.
for
That's
that
a
one.
dad joke. I'll
yeah,
use that.
that was the original, and then they
Hmm.
had to change it, I
Yeah.
heard. So
Mhm.
it was a lot of energy of just trying to, like, fit into places, and again, like, it happens some places and it happens sometimes. um
Where
and I think
where was this low income housing? Low.
in Appleton, Wisconsin.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
so we were, it was food stamps, it was Medicare, Medicaid, it was, just, rental assistance and all that different kind of stuff. My mom was a self-employed cleaning lady, and just did, what she knew how and what she could, and it was, you know just providing all that. I mean, like, we never went hungry. We always had a roof over our head. We were, at least in most contexts, like in a somewhat safe environment there, and in at least in our place. But like, there wasn't a lot of control over what happened in other people's apartments, right? And
Mhm.
like what they did and stuff like that. So, we did what we could, and she relied on, her understanding of faith and her communities to, like, kind of help guide what she was doing. Because I mean, years later, of course, I find out like she had her own stuff growing up and her own
Mhm.
trouble in relationships and things like that. And so as a parent now, I think of like, oh, like, managing all that stuff
Mm-hmm.
and trying to, like, keep little people alive, like, wow, that's a lot, right?
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
Well, this is usually where you ask another question.
Well, so how did that bring you into relationship with drugs and alcohol?
my mom got remarried to this trucker guy named Bean Beard, was his name.
I like the way you said
Trucker.
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 How old were
And
you?
he was the, like, when you think of stereotypical, like, trying to be a cowboy trucker, like, there he is, right?
Mhm.
Like, just him. And so, like, got married. He smoked. My mom started smoking again. I thought, like, this looks cool, right? Like, let's try this out. And my friends, and again, it was just kind of like this weird. I don't believe that drugs are gateways, right? I think that's like you're trying to blame, like, like a thing, like an inanimate thing for, like, someone. Like, no, stop it.
Mhm.
I think people are gateways, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think influence is gateway. I think the people around me, there was influence and I wanted to be a part of, and there were people that were doing different types of substances. And as I continued to meet those people and realize that I needed more of those things to mitigate internal wounds and damage, that I found what I needed, right? And the people were the gateways, not the substances themselves. And so I think I first started picking up smoking and drinking pretty early on when I was in middle school. Uh, I remember, one time I somehow got involved with some party. I don't know where it was, but I came home and I was drunk and I was throwing up, passed out on the floor, and I was like 12, 13 years old. My mom comes in. She's just, you just see the disappointment, right? Like, that look cuts through everything, no matter what level of you're at, right? And I'm like, no, mom, I'm just sick. I've got the flu, right? And her thing always was, if you ever start using, if you ever start drinking or anything, you're going to end up just like your dad, right? That was always the thing, right? And he was a guy that was in and out of prison my whole life. He was a chronic alcoholic. He was super abusive, and so that was always like the almost like the just say no version. Like, don't ever do it. You're going to end up like him, and we don't like him, so don't do that.
Mhm.
And I think, as I started getting more involved and invested in that using time period, like, eventually it wore away, and the switch kind of flipped internally, and I just said, like, here I am, I'm like him, right? Now it's just kind of like it's going to happen
It's
now, as a
done.
self-fulfilling
Mm-hmm.
prophecy, right? So I started out with smoking and drinking, and then between middle and high school, got high my first time, and really, like, I don't think of, like, well, what's your drug of choice? My drug of choice is, well, what do you have,
Right.
right? It was what do you have to help me deal with this, whatever this is. And the relief was great at first, right? Like it truly did wonders for the amount of stress and anxiety and mental health stuff and trauma that was there, right? But it was very short lasting. And then it was, well, I need more of it, and it needs to be, and I need to, and it wasn't just using substances, it was stealing, it was doing all kinds of stuff, right? It was all kinds of different things that I was looking for any way to deal with this pressure and this energy that was just compiled there for years and years that I didn't know how to talk about or know how to deal with, right? And and it led to some dark places and to some situations and things that I'm certainly not
Mm-hmm.
proud of, but like that's what survival was at the time. I had a friend of mine, he was a mentor for a while, and he said, listen, with the amount of stuff that people or I went through in particular, there's really kind of three options, right? Suicide, go catatonic, or use a crap ton of drugs, right? And the third one is the one you get to live through, right? So be grateful that that's where you went to, right? And it took a while. I'm like, okay, I could see that because there are those other two, like I certainly had ideas of suicide, but like never really um, played with them that much. If anything, throughout my using, I wanted to like passively die, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would just take a ton of stuff and be like, I hope I don't wake up, right? That's how I would deal with those situations. Very, very Midwest passive aggressive, like even to myself, you know.
Let me ask you, what were you like as a kid? You had the Full House reference, um, watching TV, but how would you describe yourself?
I was a really energetic, creative kid who was either really extroverted or really introverted off and on. And again,
Hmm.
like in retrospect, I can look back and say like, oh, when I was kind of hiding from everything is when I was some stuff was coming up, right? And when I
Mm-hmm.
was feeling better, I was really connected and loved hanging out and tried to get involved with sports. But again, like I didn't always feel like I fit in with stuff. Um,
What did you
and
like to do?
I like to play basketball. I got involved with basketball
Hmm.
and when I was a kid and continued to play that and I still try to play it today and
I know.
uh,
Hmm.
you know um, I think they have like the NBA and the G League and then somewhere down here
Hmm.
is like the Z team or something. I'd probably be about there. But
Hmm.
so I like those things and as I got older I got into like playing disc golf a lot. And played that for a lot of years. And it's
Huh.
even before like so I started playing disc golf in like '92.
When it
Back when
first came out.
yeah like when the first like my older brother and some of his friends like they caught on to it pretty quick when it first started, and so I got to see that and caddy for him during a world tournament and do different cool stuff. So there were a lot of opportunities, but I like I got into that and I got into comic books a lot when I was 12. Really,
Hmm.
like that became another great place for me to explore creativity and
What's your
kind of
favorite?
like escape a little bit. What's
What are your
that?
favorite comic books?
Well, my favorite ones today still are the X-Men, and that was the first comic book I ever bought as well. Like
Wow.
X-Men #7. Yep.
We were in the days of Richie Rich and the
Uh-huh.
Archies,
Archie.
and
Yeah,
those
yeah.
are our comic books.
Superman was available
Yeah,
back
but I
then.
didn't. I loved Richie Rich. I don't know why, and I love the Archies,
I
which
liked
is
Archie.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they still make those today. I mean, like
Yeah.
there's still a demographic.
The X-Men. So when did the X-Men come out?
63.
And wow,
Yeah.
I don't remember ever seeing those until they started making them into movies, but who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah.
So you
Hmm.
graduated high school?
Year late, but yeah.
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 Hmm.
So our city had one of the first alternative schools, and so like I went in like I couldn't, and it's funny when you talk about the learning in the CCAR training because I realized like I'm useless in like traditional school systems. I just cannot. Like I tried to go back to college and I did horrible. I couldn't get it. It's like you ever see that cartoon and there's like a giraffe, a
Oh
monkey,
yeah,
a
yeah.
fish. some other animal, and it's like race to the top of the tree.
Right.
And come on. And I felt like that more oftentimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the schools just didn't attune to what I needed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we talk about adult learning, and we talk about like audio, visual, kinetic, and I think for me there's like a fourth one, and I'm like a relational learner,
Mm-hmm.
right? I need to be in a place, in an environment where I can have relationship and where I can have the ability to connect and watch and see what's going on around me. And like that's how I learn and absorb things around me, like all the things that are going on at the same time. But there's got to be like an environment for that to be allowed to happen. So it was tough in kind of traditional high school, and then I got moved over to the alternative school. And I remember in my interview, I wore a tie-dye shirt, and it had like poppy plants and dope plants and opium all over it. And I'm like, I'm getting into this school, right? Like,
The shirt got you in.
yeah,
The
this is what I'm
alternative
gonna do.
school.
Phil's shirts keep him out
Yeah,
of places, but
it was a half day, and they gave you credits for work. And again, like a gateway, like I met some really cool people at the time. Like I
Mm-hmm.
thought, like when it comes to like badges of honor, getting in the alternative school and hanging out with these kids, like I thought, like and I just I was supposed to graduate in '98, took a little bit longer, but it was like October of '99 where eventually I graduated, and then I didn't know what to do after that, right? And I just kind of drifted for a little bit.
Um, when did you become aware of your learning style?
Couple of years really, like
Mm-hmm.
I never knew what to call it, because audio, visual, kinetic never really like yeah, I get that, and they kind of make sense, but they never really fit for what I would experience. And so like when I sat in training, right, like it was as much about hearing the content as it was watching you and Art work together, and your relationship and the relationship you had with the classroom, and how you created an environment for that absorbing and learning and processing of information to be able to happen, right?
Hmm.
It's almost like maybe it's the foundation of the other three, maybe it's a deeper level of the other three, I'm not sure, but it really is like I feel like relational learning is super important for me, about and how I get. That's why like when I try to do online classes, it's super tough, ton of anxiety when I try to like power through those things, because there's no relationship, right? There's the audio, the visual, and the kinetic pieces of doing it, but no relationship, right? No ability to get feedback and connection, um, from what the environment is providing, right? So I've kind of like adapted that, especially when I think about training. That to me is super important. That those working agreements, that creating that environment, that courageous space, like that's the container in which people are going to have relationship with each other, and be able to absorb and take in the content. And so it's important to me that those things are set up there, and that I can facilitate that and continue to maintain that container throughout whatever's going on.
Wow. Uh, so talk to me a little bit about how you found, because I'll back up a little bit. Just the idea of those three not working for you: audio, visual, kinetic. And I think it's almost you're on either a spiritual or emotional connection. It's almost like the
Mm-hmm.
ability empathic in a lot of ways, right? That
Mm-hmm.
when you're in there, you're feeling each other's presence and how people relate to
Mm-hmm.
each other, and that really helps you learn. And
Mm-hmm.
that's fascinating. So that's kind of where I went with all that.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're even going back and forth. Do we do our staff meetings? Like we have 64 staff people. Do we do them in Zoom? Because it's a lot easier for people just to get on a Zoom meeting and,
Mm-hmm.
wherever they are than travel. But the majority of staff that I've talked to about this want to meet in person. They just
Mm-hmm.
say it's better, it's different.
Mm-hmm.
So you were struggling with alcohol and drugs, and obviously you're now a man in recovery, self-proclaimed. What was your turning point?
So I eventually, like a friend of mine, he got busted with a bunch of dope. He was wearing wires, and he would ask me to get him connected with folks, and so I did. So my three of my felonies are like no drugs passed my hands. I was literally a middleman.
Yeah.
for these. And that's where my convictions came from. And then when I started getting involved in court proceedings, like I made a mess of all of it, like I ditched out on my lawyer, because I spent the money for his retainer fee on taking like a bender down in Chicago. It was weird, right? Doing things that you do. Um, but eventually, like when you don't go to court and you call in like a job, they don't like that apparently. Like I'm like, sorry, I can't make it today. I don't have a ride. And they're like, cool, you've got a warrant out for your arrest. And I'm like, oh, whatever, right? So towards the end, like the paranoia got super
Oh,
heightened. I didn't want to leave the house. I was ingesting all kinds of stuff. Um, and then one night, I was out with some friends and we were driving, we got pulled over, and it was this really weird situation where like for some reason the police brought the two people I was with back to the car, and it was like 20, 30 feet back, right? And they just left me in the car all by myself. And I'm looking out both windows and I'm like, I can see nothing but backyards. And it was like February in Wisconsin, so the snow is a little deep. Like I could run. So I thought, right? I'm like, you have that courage piece that's maybe not quite true. But I just stopped and I'm like, I'm tired. I'm just tired,
Yeah.
right? I'm just done. So I just stayed, right? I'm like, I can't keep doing this. And I've spent the night in jail, and it started a 9 month jail stint at Outagamie County Hotel here. And throughout that time, again, like I'd never really addressed the behaviors. It was about like, how do you fit in? And how do you get connected better? And like I got put into a same cell block as some of the people, like, so when my friend was wearing wires on people, one of the people he wore it on, like we ended up in the same block. It wasn't exactly a lot of fun to walk into that and that person say like, that's the narc right there, right? That's a great target on your back to start out with, a good way to start the morning. Eventually that dissipated. He got moved. I concocted all these schemes and plans inside jail where I thought I was going to be this like prolific Midwest drug dealer of some kind and pay everyone back and figure it out. And the problem was like I just was just my own best customer, so I had to figure out how not to be, right? And then, fast forward, get sentenced. It was 35 years withheld. It was 5 years probation. Um, and I'm sneaking drugs up into the jail, right? Because why not? And eventually, like when I'm on work release, they find out that I'm continuing to use, and my probation officer is like, I want to send you to prison, right? But for whatever reason, her boss said send him to treatment, right? So I had a week between getting out of jail and going to treatment, and it was Thanksgiving of that week. My mom begged for me to be out, right, for that. And it was funny, like when we talk about like forks in the road situations, when I got out of jail and they let me out at midnight for some reason, because that makes sense. It was like a guy I met in jail with like a 24 pack in the back of his car and my brother who was ready to bring me somewhere safe. And they were both there, and like what a thing, right? Like who are you gonna go with? And of course I went with the guy with the 24 pack, and I continued to use throughout the course of that week. The first month I was in treatment and getting exposed to meetings and stuff like that, right? And like really confused and trying to figure out what this was. And I was so grateful. One of the first meetings I went to, because I had all the projections of what those people in recovery looked like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember I walked into one of my first meetings, and there was this guy there with like long hair, huge goatee, tattoos up and down. A bunch of them were comic book tattoos, and he happened to be a drummer in a metal band. And I said, "Oh, this isn't going to be so bad."
hmm
My
Right?
people.
That right. That guy went on to be like a pretty significant like mentor and person in my life for a long time, right? And I met other people, right, that like that I could share stuff with, and they liked disc golf and other common interests and stuff like that. And again, it was about that connection in that community, and we all kind of resonated at those levels together, right? Um, but I did continue to use. I would go and drink, and then go back to functions and stuff like that, and it was just really like testing all these different things. And then I went on a home pass, wrong person, wrong place, got high, came back, and the director of the treatment facility was there filling in on a Sunday, coincidentally. And I'm just gone, right? And I'm like, I went to his place and I don't know what was going on, but I got a contact buzz. And he looks at me and goes, all right, okay. And then just let me be, right? And then, got a UA and went back to jail for a week. And it was that week that everything kind of came to a head, right? It was a week in jail, and it was like really facing everything. It was facing like, this is the damage that I've done. This is the stuff. This is where I've gotten my life to. This is how I've avoided accountability. And to top it all off, there was a really bad flu bug going through the jail, so that was added bonus. And the PO for the treatment facility, because it was a Department of Corrections run facility, came up, and it was the first time that I just put all the cards out. I said, yep, this is what's going on. This is what I did. I had no expectation that I was actually going to be let back there. I just knew it was over, right? I'm like, I might as well get used to the fact I'm going to prison next week, right? And, call it what you will, the planets aligned, the force, a miracle. He called back up and he said, we've decided to let you come back, right? That month I was there, I'm grateful the staff had allowed me to be in like positions of leadership. So I got to go to staff meetings as like the client representative and talk about what was going on. And I can think about when I was in high school and all these different times in my life where like these seeds were being planted, right? Where people would just like believe in me enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
And seeds and plants grow the best in manure, right? And I had a ton of shit in my life. So they were like putting it like in this ripe fertilizer my whole life. And it was just these places, all of a sudden it would start to sprout and it would start to come up. And like, oh, I get what they were saying now. I get what this means. I understand this. Again, relational, right? And they said, we're gonna let you back. And there thus started like my pathway. I took it super serious after that. Got through my treatment episode, got heavily engaged in our local recovery fellowship, moved back to Appleton, took on, group service positions. All my learning of nonprofit came through group service, right? Mm-hmm. That's where I learned about boards, nonprofit structures, budgets, Robert's Rules of Order. It's where I learned how to put on functions. I got involved with state conventions and how to do those things and plan events. Like, I grew up in all of that. That's how I learned all this stuff. And then I learned more of it when I worked for Goodwill later.
How old were you when you got into recovery?
That's what I was going to ask.
I knew you were, so I beat you to it.
I was 20.
Really?
20.
Yeah.
You had a lot of life up to the point of 20. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
I remember, like 21's a big deal in Wisconsin because we're the drinking capital of whatever. I was in a 3-quarter house and I had to give my roommate my ID for the week. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I learned early in recovery is like, I got to set myself up for success. I know there's going to be something, so I'm going to do things to like, kind of like deter me from that later on, mm-hmm. right? So I gave my ID for a week. And I made it through my 21st birthday, right? And not having to be indoctrinated in the ritual of going to a bar and stuff like that, right? Like I just never did. I never had to have that experience.
Mm.
Your story is fascinating, and it's quite the roller coaster. So you're involved in, you're out of prison, you're attending, you're working on your recovery. What'd you do for work? How'd you support yourself?
There's this amazing place in Neenah, Wisconsin called Step Industries at the time. And so what it was, like, we have Kimberly-Clark here, a huge kind of paper manufacturing company. Mm-hmm. There was a guy in recovery, and he went through the same treatment in Appleton I went through, but several years before. And he walked in one day and he saw these guys just like no jobs. No one would hire them. They're alcoholics, they're drug addicts, right? So he went to Kimberly-Clark and said, hey, we've got all this work no one wants to do. What if I started a place where we could do all that, right? Mm-hmm. And so Step Industries, for about 40 years now, has been hiring people in recovery, right? It's the first I've ever known of its kind. Mm-hmm. So when I was in treatment in Oshkosh, I got hired at Step Industries, and so we would sort diapers and fem care products. More fem care products went through these hands
than any woman ever.
Anybody I know, right? millions, right? And again, I was so minimum wage, but it was a recovery environment. So we start each day off with recovery readings and getting connected. And that guy that I met in the meetings was there, Mike, who had the tattoos and stuff like that. Um, it was people engaging in community, connecting with each other for rides and for support and all this stuff, right? Like it was just constant recovery environment. So we knew each other. Like there were people literally at my work, at my 3-quarter, and at meetings that I just saw all the time, right? And so I worked for Step Industries for a while, and again got more responsibility. They let me drive a tow motor around the warehouse and like move huge bales of stuff. Ooh. And I took some other jobs here and there, but ultimately I went back to them a few times. So that's really where I got kind of started and rooted. And again, they gave me a lot of responsibility. They gave me opportunities and chances to like lead production lines and be the one responsible for the counts and lead a team eventually, right? Like do all these different things and just added responsibility. And that's the kind of stuff again that grew, right? That I thrived on, that helped me heal and be able to do the things I needed to do.
Wow. I don't think I ever heard that story before about having a place that hired people in recovery for 40 years and gave people that start. That's just really inspiring. Where are you today? How would you describe what your life is like today? What do you do?
Well, one thing I'll say, that place that hired me is called Apricity now. And
Called what?
Apricity,
Apricity.
it means something like light in the winter or some weird thing.
All right.
But it's like that treatment center, Mooring and Step Industries merged, and their 3-quarter houses merged.
Oh, wow.
And so I've trained they train CCAR, right? They have recovery coaches with CCAR. And that's the model they use for their coaches that go into emergency departments and stuff like that. So, right, weird connections, great connections.
Yeah.
Where am I at today? I am grateful and blessed and fully aware of, as much as I can, my presence and impact on things that maybe I wasn't so aware of, right? So just a lot of the stuff that I've been involved with after Apricity and Step, and eventually like I really wanted to work with young people, right? And I remember applying for the Boys and Girls Club. I wanted to be a volunteer. I'm like, I've got a story, I can help kids. And the Boys and Girls Club said, no, you're a felon. Like don't come back here, right? In 05 and in 06, I actually applied for AmeriCorps several times, and I got turned down from 2 AmeriCorps jobs. And then eventually I got into a youth runaway and outreach program at that same Boys and Girls Club, but I had like 5-6 years in recovery at that point. And so I got to start to go into schools and share and talk about a little bit about my story, but also like dangers of running away and hand out cards. And it was my way into the nonprofit, because I was at the Boys and Girls Club, and each one of the staff was also put at an offsite location, and my location was Harmony Cafe, which was a program of goodwill. So I was helping co-facilitate youth LGBT groups. And as I was at Harmony, I started making a Jesse-shaped hole, and then eventually I took on booking the art shows, the volunteerism, live music, hosting open mic nights, and doing all that stuff there, and eventually became a program director at Harmony under Goodwill. And that's really where I learned even more about nonprofit, right? Like being a part of this huge Goodwill Industries, they're the ones that actually paid for me to go to CCAR. So I remember, our Goodwill was like kind of this hub of all these different things and resources. And I would identify in meetings, like people would be talking about like, I don't know what to do about this or do about that. And I'm like, I know like 7 nonprofits that do that. Like, let me help you. And so I went to Goodwill and I pitched this recovery case management idea. I had created sliced bread and said, no one else is doing this, right? Like, I'm going to work with people, set up SMART goals, and help them get connected to resources in the community. And Goodwill said, that sounds nice. Why don't you see if anyone else is doing it? I'm like, no, right? So, and I didn't have the words for it, but eventually the word recovery coach clicked. And I'm like, that's an interesting thing, right? And then I looked up recovery coaching, and there was, this was 2008, so there weren't as many of them out there, right? You got McShin and a few other places, and the Minnesota one popped up, and in Georgia and stuff like that. But it was CCAR that was cited in several SAMHSA documents as well, for whatever reason. You did a great job, right? And I'm like, well, if I'm going to pitch this, I need to pitch one that's got some legitimacy to it. And that's how I determined legitimacy at the time, was the federal government says they're cool, right? So I went to Goodwill and I said,
Yeah.
I went to Goodwill and said, well, here it is. They're doing it. Can I go do that and become a recovery coach and a trainer? They said, sure, make it happen. So they paid for everything, airfare, hotel, the entire training, all my meals and everything, to send me out to Connecticut to do that. And wow, that was a profound experience that week on so many levels. Still connect with some of those folks from that training. So that really set me off, because up until that point, I didn't know about RCOs. I didn't know about any of this other stuff, right? Like that really blew my world open as to what was possible, and created the trajectory to be where I'm at today, with having Helios now for 7 years, working with states and nonprofits about bringing their recovery supports to up to a place that they support their community, training coaches. I mean, having that amazing opportunity with CCAR last year to train hundreds of coaches in all the different flavors of curriculum, right? Being able to do those things, and then get connected in other capacities, and working for, I took a little bit of time off of Helios. I was a director of a peer run respite here in Appleton for a little bit, and then worked for Faces and Voices for a little while. And that even blew my mind even more as to what was out there, and being able to see things on a national and international level of what was changing. And so again, I'm really grateful today that I get to see those things and advocate for this work in a lot of different spaces, and be able to say, this is legitimate stuff, clearly there's some things that have been missing, and this is how we take care of it, right? This is how we listen to people in the community. This is how we build, and the mission of Helios is really about igniting and supporting leaders in recovery, right? It's really become the focus. I don't do one-on-one coaching so much anymore. It's about supporting leaders and people in recovery who have that fire back, and it's well, what do they do with it? And I've seen so many people kind of become social media influencers, or their woundedness becomes their resume that they get to spill all over the place. And let's hone it in a little bit, right? With some emotional intelligence and some servant leadership. Let's kind of, get that hose under control, if you will. And I get to do that today, right? And have those conversations in those spaces. And 4 amazing kids. I have a teenager.
Yeah, tell us about the family.
Oh, it's an amazing gig. I'll tell you, Father's Days are the hardest, right? They just are, every year. And I like that idea, the body keeps score, emotional memory kind of stuff. So 2 weeks usually before Father's Day, and 2 weeks before my dad passed away, I feel the funk. I feel some shit starting to stir up, right? I'm what is this about? And it isn't usually till the day of or after. I'm oh yeah, this happens every year. It's I purposely forget. But they're just so hard, because I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that relationship dynamic. I didn't understand how to give or receive affection on those levels. And it's still kind of figuring it out. And to me, when people talk about Father's Day, and they're oh, I'm going to go do whatever. And I'm well, why wouldn't I hang out with my kids on that day? That makes sense to me, right? Spend time with the people that made me a father. And so I get to convey messages to them and say things to them, and I've learned it's not about being 180 of what my dad was, because that's still part of a cycle, right? That's still part of a thing. It's about breaking the entire cycle and having a different foundation, if you will, of something new that's not originated or planted in those things. I can still look at it. It had its learning moments. It had things that, of course, I don't want to be but I don't have to parent from a place of where I was wounded or hurt, right? I can recreate the whole dynamic. And so that's what I've been trying to do my best with, in my relationship with my children, my relationship with my wife, of we believe that, we're high performance because we're high maintenance, right? So we do a lot to take care of ourselves, and we do a lot to modeling that take care of ourselves and allow them to have space for their feelings. And so I think that, the best we can, we're creating an environment where they can be who they are. And we also know we got to save up for their like college/rehab fund, right?
Yes.
Because that's a possibility. Like
Well,
there's no home environment that's perfect. And
we're chuckling because, we've been there, and we've had our son Matthew on this podcast talking about his own recovery. And I'm always inspired that, he's in recovery. He says he's in recovery, and he did not, I don't think he's ever been to a 12-step meeting. Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? How do you take care of your recovery today?
Yeah, my recovery.
And how many years has this been now?
A little over 21 years.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's changed a lot. So I have some men's groups that I'm actively a part of. I found early in recovery that like it wasn't just recovery meetings and fellowships that were important, but I had to seek things outside of it as well to really do like deep work. Like an adult children of alcoholics weekend, Mankind Project. Last August, I went to Ireland for a week-long retreat with the Lumen group, and it was like a lot of like just a contemplative retreat, right? Which was really powerful, and being in Ireland was incredible. So I know from me, there's like this cadence of like every 5-6 years, like I got to do a deep dive. And then I got to have regular maintenance as well, right? And so the regular connection with what I call like my Fab Five, like those people around me that I can talk about anything with, I've got that group, therapy, ongoing therapy. I've got other outlets like basketball and connecting with folks on other things that aren't necessarily like about recovery, but they're about filling me up, right? They're about like the maintenance in my cup. I don't ever want to mistake my work or my advocacy for self-care.
Right.
And as good as it feels and as amazing as it is, it's also not the same thing as like doing my work. I learned early on in recovery, like I need to do this work in order to do this work, right? And I've had great people challenge me on different dynamics, and people, when I was working with the cafe and talking about like the LGBTQ community and understanding my own identity and what that work looks like, working with Dr. Moore, Eddie Moore Jr. and the Privilege Institute, and talking about what anti-racism work looks like in this space and other spaces, and things that have just really kind of continue to drive me in all these different areas. I gotta continue to look at those pieces.
You've understand the multiple pathways concept. How are you thinking about multiple pathways today?
I remember when you said multiple pathways, and this is like a core memory in the training. You were like moderation-based recovery, and it came up about like all these different things, right? And I remember I looked and I'm like, how do you measure success in this, right? Like, how do you know you're doing it? And I got really pissed because I was like, the training challenged my fundamental understanding of what recovery was. And I say, like, if I wouldn't have been stuck in Connecticut, I probably would have walked out, right? And like, this is garbage. I'm done here. But I stayed. And so it really, what that did in that moment was it taught me that like I had to solidify my own roots in recovery so that I could better support people in their recovery. And like the managing my stuff piece has become about like when I'm threatened by or scared of or retaliatory towards someone's pathway, it's really not about them, right? It's about like, oh, this is like a thing I have to look at. So when you talk about like the psychedelic aspect, we talk about like all these different pathways, harm reduction things, like over time of just like, okay, what is it? What do I gain from like thinking that there's one way, or what do I gain from when I support someone in their way? And and so I've just really tried to be open to what people need in those areas, and that there are all these pathways. Um, and I learned too, like when I've done some of that retreat work, like I always thought like, oh, people that were wounded turn to drugs and alcohol, but it turns out like people get wounded and like they do other things and they find other ways to heal, believe it or not, right? And not drug and alcohol related. So there was some of that expansion as well. Like people just heal, and their recovery looks their own way too. And so it's like, to me, it's about expanding worldview and understanding, like, I really got to take a look at my stuff, because I'm susceptible from my upbringing to be very like, I'll go from like evangelical to fundamentalist very quickly about something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I got to look at that, and I got to undo some of that stuff, because it's been damaging to others when I do that.
I've been really wrestling in my own evolution of working in recovery that quite often, even I was on a 3-hour webinar yesterday with someone I respect very highly, very clinically oriented about recovery. And it was talking about multiple pathways of recovery and medication assisted, but there was still this underlying message that recovery equaled substance free.
Mm-hmm.
And and I'm still trying to orient the work that I'm doing, but I think there is a subliminal message that it is substance free. And even when we talk about co-occurring disorders, it gets really messy and funky and how to do it. And I remember also you said, like, how do you celebrate the milestones, right? Like, if it's not time served, how do we know? Well, a lot of times the fact that I can get up and go and stand in front of a room of 300 people and speak, like, that's a freaking big milestone from where I came from.
Yeah. Yeah. And I get those conversations in trainings too, right? Where like folks are like, well, substance free is it, right? And I'm like, well, people tell me that between their 16 Monster energy drinks and hitting off a vape for all day, that I should be clean. I say, so it's not about your substance, it's about the substances that are scary to you, right? It's subjective in the substances that we choose to like have a part of our recovery or not part of our recovery, right? And I'm not saying like people should go quit Monster energy drinks or vaping. I'm just saying like tobacco kills more people than anything else. And we're like, what is our cause and what is our rationale for justifying some substances over others, right? And it really is about like rhetoric, and it's about what's causing damage at the moment, or it's about people having the loudest voice about what's the most painful thing right now. And I'm like, okay, but how do we continue to meet people where they're at? And I would say in my own recovery, like about 3-4 years in, I got diagnosed with depression and ADHD, and I was really struggling. And I got put on some antidepressants, and I would say that was medicated assisted recovery, right? On those antidepressants, and it 3-4 years in, right? And I equate it the same way. It was a medication that allowed me to do what I needed to do for a little bit. Now, the detox from it was probably the worst detox I've ever had in my life, worse than anything I've ever experienced, but that's a different podcast. So yeah, the multiple pathways piece. And I too, I'm really curious about like, mental health and substance use recovery, and like the overlap and the difference, and like how those things are being talked about. And it's a fascinating landscape. And I find people in both camps very assured of like what their understanding is and what it needs to look like. And I don't know, I think it's a really both fascinating and somewhat scary time with how people are putting their belief systems into these things, but I'm hoping we can explore more of it.
Yeah, it's very polarizing. It's right and wrong, black and white thinking, all of that. I've kind of morphed into a fourth quadrant that Don Coyhus talks about. He talks about the physical, mental, spiritual, right? And that gets some play. Spiritual gets some play, not as much as I'd like to see. But the fourth one that's been disregarded for a lot is emotional. And I've been on this journey the last several months, really thinking about the emotional component of recovery and healing. And Sandy had a book out at Vacation, Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown, and the power in labeling emotion. And my journey has been one of labeling emotion. Oh, that's what I'm feeling. That's what I'm feeling. That's what I'm feeling. And being aware of that, and then using the other quadrant, like your mental part, to put your I over your E. Just because I'm feeling that, I have identified it, but doesn't mean I have to respond to it.
Yeah.
So how do you think about emotion?
Yeah. I was introduced to emotional intelligence and maturity like early on in my career at Goodwill. Like, and that was like '07, and they were just starting to talk about how EQ is almost somewhat more important than IQ, right? Like how leaders are managing their stuff when they come into the workplace. And so we would do deep dives and read books about this and talk about, like, it's great if you've got stuff, but like, how are you managing that? And what does that look like? And how can you understand the complexity and nuance of both being able to hold your stuff and then hold space for other people at the same time in their stuff, and that they don't necessarily have to impact each other, right? And I think, for me, like, those are some of the core building blocks that need to happen early in recovery, is talking more about emotional maturity, emotional intelligence, and our relationships with our emotions. Like, anger isn't like I'm just pissed off. Anger has got a message, right? Like, what's it trying to tell me? And when I sat with this Zen group for a number of years, I'd always say, pick up the phone. When the emotion comes up, pick up the phone. What's it telling you, right? Is it current moment information that you're trying to process, or is this something maybe from somewhere else, right? Is this like a window or a mirror that's going on from your past experiences? And then how do you interact with those things? And more appropriately, like, how do you kind of unpack them in a place that's not going to damage others, and then be aware of what those impacts are maybe when they do come out a little bit, right? So I agree with you. Like, learning about my relationship with my emotions and the reactions and the impact is super important right now, and an invitation that I try to put out there. And I think this transcends just recovery. It's like a human thing of, like, we're messy, right? Like,
Oh
we're
yeah.
just we're like these messy beings running around the planet, like, emotions all over the place, and like no one's got it perfectly figured out. Um, you know, to some degree, I'm probably just like faking it a lot of the times, whatever, right? But emotions are constantly moving around, and that's okay. Like, that's part of the experience, right? That's part of what makes us complex and nuanced. Now, what we do with those things, that's the responsibility and the accountability piece. Like, I saw this post on Facebook. How am I going to react? Does it really matter? I saw this thing come up in my news feed. How am I going to react? How do I own my reaction to that, and it not come out on someone else, because that person's not really responsible for my work, right? So those are the things. And like, I'm trying to give less and less energy and buy-in to what those are, and understand more and more, like, why my reaction is what it is and what information it holds.
It's a great point.
Phil often says, what happens if I do nothing? Like, as an option. I'm always thinking, what am I going to do? He's like, what about if we do nothing?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned the whole social media piece too, and my latest question, as I continue to be a work in progress, right, is to, how important is social media? I mean, in the scheme of life, or in the scheme of things, or to me personally, we were talking, we had a little leadership retreat, and we have two outstanding digital communications managers, Melvin and Sedona, and they've improved our social media like leaps and bounds. Will social media get people to act? Will it change people's opinions or minds? Or because the way a lot of social media is, it's geared to what you already believe and know. I think that's what you're going to keep seeing and hearing. So how are you actually going to reach people that
Mm-hmm.
might some more awareness about what really happens with addiction and
Mm-hmm.
recovery reaches them? Is that the best vehicle? So we're having those discussions. I have no answers
Yeah.
to it. No answers at all.
I get caught up as someone with a small business about the same things,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
How much social media? And
Yeah.
I can tell you in 7 years,
Mm-hmm.
I've not had one contract or training come through social media,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's all been relationship.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I get more traction talking at a conference than anything else. And so I've been in the same thing, like what's the importance of social media? And I'm like, okay, like it's fun, cat videos and sloth videos are great and some amusement and stuff like that. But I'm not willing to subject myself or my business to tapping into the vein that's going to ignite people to continue polarization.
Mm.
Because that's how social media to me is really like influence people. It's like when I'm willing to drop into this place to start us versus theming them, that's what grabs traction. And I'm not willing to go into that place, right? Um, to some degrees, like I mean, fun memes and whatever, but like I'm not willing to subject my business and my values to a place that's going to really impact and continue the what I would consider like the dark side of the moon or the toxic piece of what social media is, right? And to me, like we were having this conversation. I think Randy Anderson, the man, the
Mm-hmm.
myth, the legend, was over
Yeah.
at our house a few weeks ago, and my wife said something about like, are you building reputation or relationships, right? And that's like, oh, that's a good litmus, right? Like, am I building relationship or am I trying to build reputation? And I
Mm-hmm.
get like maybe some overlap or whatever, but when I build relationship in a way that's
Hmm.
it, that's bringing folks in and I can do these things, like I've just stopped with social media. I'm like, I'll maybe post like stuff through my business once in a while, but I don't get a lot of engagement, and that's not where I want to put my energy into. It's not for me to do that. And maybe there is a lot of relevance to it. Maybe there's algorithms and stuff that you can tap into, but like for me in a small business, that's just not been helpful, right? I get it more through relationship than I do online reputation.
Well said. I'm going to use that. Are you building relationship or are you building reputation?
Yeah.
And I think there's also a part as CCAR that we want to always, and I again look to Don Coyas about pulsing,
Mm,
the drum beat, being consistent. I want CCAR to be a place where people can find positive recovery messaging. It's not
mm-hmm.
that it's there to, we want to push it in front of people or necessarily, but as we build it, it's a place to find positive recovery messaging. And if people are looking for it, they can find it. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
that's and sometimes I do think people look and access through social media and the bigger channels for that. And I want to be there for that because there's a lot of the
Yeah.
other stuff on there. So it's a little different than like trying to, I jokingly say I want 1 million subscribers to our YouTube channel, right? And we're up to 322,000? No,
Just 322.
322,
Yeah. Right.
We got a little ways to go, but
Right.
um, it is to be available to be that positive influence, and that whole influencer thing is like really wrestling with that too, and what to
Yeah.
do with that.
I think I like the word presence better than like influence, right?
Yeah.
Like have a presence that people know is available. I mean, that's one of the things we struggled with at Harmony when we had like one of Northeast Wisconsin's youth LGBT groups for them to come and hang out for a couple hours, right? We would
Hmm.
provide programming, and we knew statistically there was like potentially 500-600 kids that could benefit from this just in Northeast Wisconsin, and then like 2 kids would show up,
Right.
right? And I'd be like, and we would rack our brains, and I'd feel all kinds of ways about it, and be like, what am I doing wrong? Why are they not coming to group? And it kind of came up with some of the young people. They would say, we don't always need to be there, but we know that it's there,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's presence, and the presence alone makes us feel safe. The presence alone, knowing that you're advocating and doing the stuff you're doing, makes us know that change is happening, right? So then I'm like, okay, the people that need it are the ones that show up, at least in that really like supportive environment. But when we did larger community events, lots of people would show up, right? They didn't always just need the direct support that we were providing, but they loved the community gatherings. They loved the the bigger picture of things, because they wanted to be a part of that presence that was created for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, like how do you create? I think CCAR has presence now, international presence, right? And that's more attractive to me than influence, right? I think healthy presence is powerful, right?
Yeah, that is, we talked a little bit about a program of attraction rather than promotion, right? That I do like the fact about just if you have a presence, people are drawn to it,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? We're not actively self-promoting. So as we wind up, is there anything else on your heart or your mind that you'd like to share?
Wow. I really kind of came in a blank slate, wasn't
Mm-hmm.
sure where it was going to go.
Mm-hmm.
We never know either.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just, I'm entire, like I said, like the week of CCAR, and it was, I guess I just want to express my gratitude. Like, wow, thank you for
Mm-hmm.
like continuing to do the work that you do, create the trainings you create, be the presence that you are, allowing me to continue to have some opportunity to give, some feedback and ideas, and that you listen to folks. That's greatly appreciated. I know amongst even other facilitators as well. Um, I just, it's cool to be a part of. It's like the cool kids club, to be a part of a presence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And see where that continues to grow and evolve. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, Jesse. It was a real pleasure having you on. I learned a lot more about you, and I'm grateful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse.